In this series, you will realize the changing landscape of organic social media. You'll be able to explain how paid, earned, and owned media apply to social. You'll be able to recognize the potential exposure social media can offer for brands. And you'll be able to identify the 3 key areas of converged media campaigns. Social media has changed a lot of things about marketing. For a very long time, it was viewed as a segment of marketing. It was part of what you did, like you might do direct mail or you might do display advertising. These days, social has managed to bleed over so much into every area of our lives and every area of how we engage with consumers online that it really has sort of redefined marketing as a whole. And that means that sometimes we need to look beyond the things that we view as social and look at the bigger picture of marketing theory, marketing concepts, and marketing approach to make sure that we're not missing something when it comes to social and when it comes to our overall digital marketing strategy. Now, sadly, over the last few years, social has started to get harder. After years of almost a free ride on the organic side, brands are starting to see a huge drop in organic exposure across the board. Now, I want to be crystal clear that when I talk about a drop in organic exposure, I'm talking about a drop in the exposure based on content brands are publishing themselves. I'm not talking about the organic consumer-driven exposure that happens when someone comes in and sees an article or a video they like and chooses to share that with their audience. Now, if we look at a site like Twitter, which really was sort of the place that gave birth to the concept of massive organic social exposure for links and conversation, that's sort of where it all began. Twitter has finally joined the world of social algorithms, and that means on some fronts, a little bit of the potential for that free ride on Twitter is starting to come to a screeching halt, because Twitter is now yet another channel that judges your content and makes the choice about whether or not it will show up to your followers based on those users and based on how they and other individuals react to the content that you actually publish out via your feed. Now, what an algorithm tends to mean in the context of social and exposure, the idea is for great content to rise to the top, while weak content, or sort of the content glut that we see happening a lot these days, kind of gets pushed into the background. With so much conversation taking place among personal connections and brands vying to get some of that attention as well, the idea behind an algorithm is to really be able to make a judgment call on whether or not the content that your brand is putting out and whether it's good enough to force its way into the feeds of the people that may at some point in time have chosen to follow you. So when it comes to Twitter, you've got to do a couple things on the organic side to sort of understand what the groundwork and the foundation looks like for you as we move into this realm of converged media concepts. So if your target audience is on Twitter, take the time to test a couple different things. Take a look at trending hashtag usage and what that tends to do to your conversations. Does that get you more responses? Does it get you exposure to new people? Take a look at strong social sharing powered by users. So making sure you've got that quick and easy one-click sharing access on your website, on any of the content that you have going out, that you've got some type of motivating factor in there, that's important. And checking to see how much of the conversation that takes place on Twitter comes from you and how much comes from third-party individuals or consumers actually sharing your content. Make sure that you're encouraging followers to favorite tweets to increase exposure, much like the like button on Facebook. That's an area of the Twitter algorithm that we've seen start to come into play. So whether or not someone retweets or even responds to you, if they click that favorite button, that sends a message to Twitter about how they value the content that you're putting out. Also, make sure that you're monitoring for customer service needs based on post volume. Not every company is going to need to have 24/7 around-the-clock coverage on Twitter. For some, it's totally okay to only be on there responding during business hours. It really depends on what the volume of conversation is and what the urge and immediacy of your customers might be if and when they actually run into a problem. And then finally, take advantage of targeted advertising on Twitter to test drive the idea of increased exposure and engagement among different target audiences or for different topics and different ideas. Now, when we move into the realm of Facebook and we consider sort of organic and what that looks like for most businesses, we know that most companies tend to have a little bit of a love-hate relationship with Facebook. There's a lot of potential exposure there, but there's also a lot of changes that are constantly coming into the algorithm, most of which are designed to make it a little bit harder for businesses to get in front of people. Now, that said, keep in mind that a Facebook fan is still 27% more likely than a non-fan to make a purchase from a brand in the month following some type of paid campaign exposure on the site. So whether it's organic reach or whether it's paid reach, there's still a lot of opportunity to drive some ultimate conversions through this. There's also the idea of a Facebook fan showing up as an endorsement on a paid ad. So the earned and the paid coming into the mix together here with a really high level of influence on how non-followers might view the ad. Because if someone who's not familiar with your brand sees people that they know and trust, have already engaged with the brand, that's going to be a lot more likely to get you some of that exposure, some curiosity, and potentially a conversion out of it. So when we look at the realm of sort of organic search and how it's kind of pulling back over time, it's important to remember that social media exposure doesn't matter any less today than it did last year. It's just about learning how to adjust the approach. And again, to do that, we need to go back to some of those concepts that we use in broader marketing terminology to say, how do we make sure all of our areas of outreach and public relations and owned content and advertising and targeting, how they're all working together to make sure we've got a stronger message going out. Now, that social sharing is also critical to the exposure you're looking for because 48% of consumers view posts made by connections as a great way to discover content, trends, brands, and products. Getting that exposure on social, actually getting in front of people, it opens the door to new opportunities with potential clients and also to you gathering stories and ideas from existing clients that might factor into your marketing down the road. Now, it's important to remember that content shared by consumers is the best social exposure you can get. So enabling and encouraging that social sharing by your audience is a critical part of anything you're going to do moving forward with social media. And in fact, we have an entire training series on that idea of what drives those social sharings that's definitely worth getting in and taking a look at. Now, if we move outside of social and we go to a more traditional approach to marketing and outreach and exposure, for ages, marketing and communications tended to look at three different types of exposure. So we consider the concept of paid, of owned, and of earned. So the question becomes, in the context of social, what does it look like to have those applied and to actually put those to work for you in the realm of social media? Now, when we look at the concept of paid media within social, this is where we're talking about things like paid search ads, sponsorships and editorial placements, promoted posts that might show up on Facebook or Pinterest or Instagram. Anything where you're paying for the specific eyeballs, especially if there's an element of targeting associated with it, is going to count as paid media within social and really within the broader digital marketing place. Now, there's also the idea of owned media. So the things that count as owned media are going to be your website, your blog, maybe the mobile apps that you've created. There's also the concept of partially owned media now that we've moved into a realm of social. So that's going to be your Facebook page, your YouTube channel, your Pinterest feed. So these are places where you have full control over the content, but you don't have full and ultimate control over everything about the interaction and the space in which people are engaging with you. There's also the idea of earned media within social. So these are things like third-party reviews, editorial mentions, social sharing. These are the different areas where consumers are saying, here's the experience that I've had with this brand or this product, and I want to come out and share it with people. Basically telling their stories and sharing their own ideas of what they think of your products or services. Now, traditionally, marketing has tended to think in budgets, and especially when we go into larger enterprise companies, we still tend to see a lot of division among the owned, earned, and paid side. So owned tends to be the breakdown of things like content and the brand itself, what's going on the website, what's going into the blog, what's the video that's being produced for YouTube or for Instagram. Whereas the earned is viewed more as social sharing, influencer outreach, and connections, the things that are designed to inspire that conversation and that sort of viralized spread within the digital landscape. And then we also have the idea of paid, so the advertising side of things. And whether that's PPC within the realm of Google, or whether that's highly targeted promoted posts on something like Twitter or Facebook or Pinterest, anything that you're going in and you're actually running an active campaign on. Now, for the most part, a lot of digital marketing teams are still broken down into those three columns. You have your team that's working on content, you have your team that's working on sort of PR and outreach, and you have your team that's working on the advertising side of things. And what tends to happen with that is we also see that budgets tend to get split up accordingly. So the allocation of funds was pretty standard across the board. Usually your content team had the least amount of money to work with because most things were being produced in-house or produced kind of quickly and on a budget, whereas your earned team might have a little bit more to go from because they might be looking at hosting events, they might need a budget for product to get it out in front of people, or to bring influencers in to have meetings or to have engagement with them. And then finally, advertising tended to have the biggest bucket available because for a lot of large companies, advertising is really the easiest way to guarantee that you're getting exposure within the social media or digital world. Now, a new approach to budgeting is really important to give consideration to. And it's not always as simple as one bucket, just throwing everything in together. But the reality is that paid, earned, and owned can no longer function as fully independent funnels. They can, but the results are not going to be as good as they will be if you take the time to have them work together. So viewing your budget as a broader digital marketing strategy and looking at each of these verticals as a portion of the team that works together, that's what we're going to be exploring in this series, is what does it look like to have paid contribute to earned, or earned contribute to owned, or any of the other combination thereof. Now, to survive in social, you're going to need some ability to adapt. When you know how they work together, you can learn how to make them more effective, and you can learn how to trigger things like amplification, or to make use of, say, consumer-generated stories into your owned media or even some of your paid advertising campaigns. That's the thing we're going to be looking at in this series, is what does it look like to actually make these work together?
Hey, want to become an expert in digital marketing? Then subscribe to the Simplilearn channel and click here to watch more such videos. To nerd up and get certified in digital marketing, click here.